In the misty Appalachian Mountains, Hannah Carter, a reclusive mountain woman, was about to make an impulsive purchase that would change her life. What started as a casual stroll through a local flea market took a shocking turn when she met a scrappy, wide-eyed donkey. Hannah, self-sufficient and resourceful from decades in the wilderness, had no idea she was stepping into a whirlwind of fortune and corporate greed. A simple $1 decision would lead to wealth, responsibility, and a bond that would transform her quiet mountain life forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist clung to the Appalachian hills like a thin, ghostly veil, softening the rugged slopes and blurring the edges of the small town below. Hannah Carter moved deliberately through the flea market, her worn boots crunching against gravel and scattered leaves, her fingers brushing lightly over the rough-hewn wooden tables and sun-bleached textiles. The air was a mixture of pine from the surrounding forest, the earthy tang of damp soil, and the faint aroma of roasted coffee beans drifting from a vendor's stand. She had walked these paths countless times, yet today something felt different, as if the mountains themselves held their breath in anticipation. Hannah's life was simple. Each day followed the steady rhythm of survival, tending her small garden, gathering herbs from the forest, mending clothes or tools, and hunting the occasional rabbit for food. She enjoyed the solitude, finding solace in the quiet companionship of the wind through the pines and the low hum of the river threading through the valley. Memories of her parents, long gone, were tucked into the folds of her mind, and her late Aunt Grace's teachings guided every step she took, lessons in self-reliance, in the value of patience, and in understanding the creatures of the land. She paused near a corner of the market where a dusty pen held a small, scrappy donkey. Its coat was rough, caked with dried mud, and its ears seemed comically oversized, twitching as it studied the crowd. Yet its eyes, those eyes held a glimmer of something unusual, curiosity, intelligence, and perhaps even mischief. The donkey brayed softly when he saw her, a short, raspy sound that made Hannah smile despite herself. "Funny little thing, aren't you?" she murmured, crouching to meet him at eye level. The donkey nuzzled her hand, wet and cold, and then took a careful step back, watching her as though gauging her intentions. The crowd of onlookers whispered and chuckled. One woman whispered loudly enough for others to hear, "That's a funny-looking donkey. Bet it's worth a fortune someday." Hannah didn't respond. She didn't need approval from strangers. Her hand slipped into her pocket, feeling the few crumpled bills she had brought. Impulse overtook calculation, and she reached into the pen's small cash box. $1, she said, placing a single bill inside. The vendor shrugged and waved her away. "Good luck with him, lady," he said. No one seemed to understand the unspoken promise she felt in that brief contact. This donkey was meant to be hers. As she led the little donkey, whom she soon named Benny, back toward the mountain trails, she began to notice the ways he moved. He followed her precisely, anticipating when she would pause or step aside. When she stooped to pick wild herbs along the path, Benny waited patiently, ears twitching, then nudged her gently with his nose when it was time to move. Hannah paused, struck by the uncanny intelligence he displayed, more attentive than any farm animal she had ever known. A neighbor, Mr. Hollis, called from his fence as she passed by. "That's no ordinary critter, Hannah. Look at his legs, his coat. Something about him's different." Hannah laughed softly, ruffling Benny's rough mane. "Maybe he's just smart enough to pick the right human," she replied, tucking the thought away. But inside, curiosity sparked. Could there be more to this donkey than anyone realized? By the time they reached her cabin, the sun was climbing over the peaks, spilling golden light across the valley. Benny explored his new surroundings with careful curiosity, nosing at the garden herbs and peering cautiously into the chicken coop. Occasionally he darted off, only to return at Hannah's soft call, as if he understood the unspoken rules of their relationship. Hannah, watching him, felt a rare warmth spread through her chest. She had not realized how lonely her days had become until Benny's quiet companionship filled the gaps. She prepared a modest meal for Benny, scattering fresh hay and water, and then sat on the cabin steps, brushing her fingers through his rough coat. "I hope you like it here, little one," she whispered, half to herself. Benny brayed softly in reply, nudging her hand with his nose. In that moment, Hannah felt something she had not allowed herself to feel for years: hope. Perhaps her life, once so predictable and insulated, was about to change. As the day wore on, Hannah led Benny through the garden, teaching him the boundaries of the land, letting him graze and speaking to him in gentle tones. She shared stories of the forest, the river, and of Grace's long-ago lessons, how the smallest beings could teach the largest truths. Benny tilted his head, ears flicking, and brayed as if understanding, reinforcing the connection forming between them. She laughed softly when he imitated her movements, nudging branches aside or stepping delicately over rocks, demonstrating intelligence and playfulness far beyond what she had expected. Hannah reflected on her solitude, the quiet rhythms of her existence, and the little joys she had taken for granted. Benny's companionship felt like an unexpected gift, a gentle nudge from the universe toward change. She allowed herself to imagine a life where connection, curiosity, and perhaps even adventure might be possible again. The wind through the pines seemed to echo her thoughts, rustling the leaves like a whisper of approval. As dusk settled over the valley, the mountains wrapped the cabin in a gentle twilight. Hannah led Benny into the barn, checking his hooves and brushing his coat. She paused, taking in the quiet, the chirping of crickets, the soft murmur of the river, the distant calls of owls settling in for the night. Benny stood quietly beside her, ears flicking, eyes alert, and Hannah realized that this little creature had already altered the course of her life. She felt a protective surge, knowing she would do anything to keep him safe. Night fell over the Appalachian hills, and Hannah sat on the porch steps, listening to Benny's soft brays and the distant rustle of the forest. The mountains had been her sanctuary for decades, yet she sensed that her world was about to expand beyond the valley in ways she could never have anticipated. The spark of discovery had been lit, the first chapter of a journey neither she nor Benny fully understood. Unseen in the shadows of the surrounding forest, the quiet stirrings of curiosity and interest began to ripple outward. Some would come out of admiration, others out of greed, and still others out of simple fascination with the extraordinary. Benny, blissfully unaware, brayed once more, a tiny herald of change, the first of many moments that would transform their lives. Hannah leaned back, her eyes scanning the mist-shrouded mountains, a soft smile tugging at her lips. She spoke to the quiet, to the wind, to the little donkey at her side. "We're going to do all right, you and me." And in the soft, star-filled night, it seemed as if the mountains themselves were listening, holding the secret of the extraordinary life that had just begun with a single $1 purchase. The morning had faded, and the Appalachian wind carried with it a promise of change, whispers of fortune, trials of character, and the enduring bond between a mountain woman and her tiny, scrappy companion, unaware yet of the adventure that lay ahead. The morning sun filtered through the dense canopy of the Appalachian forest, scattering warm, golden light across the cabin clearing. Hannah Carter stood at the edge of her garden, brushing dirt from her hands after a morning of planting wildflowers and vegetables, when she noticed movement along the old gravel driveway. A small convoy of cars, some dusty from mountain roads, others gleaming with city polish, was approaching, drawing curious glances from the neighboring hills. Hannah's heart tightened slightly. She had lived in solitude for decades, and sudden attention was a rarity she wasn't entirely comfortable with. The first visitor to step out of a car was Emily Brooks, Hannah's childhood friend and now the town's trusted veterinarian. Emily's long brown hair was tied into a practical ponytail, and her green jacket bore a smattering of mud, suggesting a morning spent at another farm. Her eyes lit up when she saw Hannah. "Hannah, I saw the donkey at the market yesterday. Is this him?" she asked, approaching Benny with cautious excitement. Benny brayed softly, taking a tentative step toward Emily, as if assessing her intentions. Hannah smiled faintly, running a hand along Benny's mane. "This is Benny, and yes, he's ours now," she replied. She had anticipated Emily's curiosity. After all, anyone who knew animals as intimately as Emily would notice the peculiar attentiveness in Benny's gaze. Emily knelt, examining Benny with the trained eyes of a veterinarian, gently palpating his legs and inspecting his coat. "He's remarkable," she said finally, standing. "I don't often see a donkey respond to humans this way. Most are stubborn, slow to react, but he seems aware. Highly aware." She glanced at Hannah, a spark of excitement dancing in her eyes. "Hannah, I think there's more to him than we understand." Hannah felt a flicker of unease. Attention had always been a double-edged sword. While Emily's interest was genuine, the idea that others might follow this news to her isolated cabin was unnerving. Still, she allowed herself a small thrill. Curiosity was dangerous, but it could also be enlightening as they spoke. Another figure appeared on the driveway, a man whose presence seemed almost out of place amid the rural simplicity of the mountains. Luke Morgan, a journalist from the city, carried a camera slung over his shoulder and a notebook in hand. His steps were measured but eager, and his eyes scanned everything with the precision of someone seeking a story. "Hannah Carter?" he asked, offering a polite smile. "I'm Luke Morgan. I heard about your donkey and, well, I'm documenting unique rural stories for a piece in a national publication. May I?" Hannah's gaze narrowed slightly. Outsiders were unpredictable, and her experience had taught her caution. "I don't usually allow reporters on my property," she said, her voice firm yet calm. "But I'll hear you out," Luke nodded, sensing the boundaries. "I respect that. I just want to understand your story, your life here, and your bond with him. That's it." He gestured toward Benny, who brayed softly as if affirming his own importance in the narrative. Emily, standing between Hannah and the visitor, offered a reassuring smile. "He's harmless, Hannah. Just curious," she said. Her presence was a buffer, and Hannah relaxed slightly, realizing that Emily's support was invaluable in navigating these new social dynamics. Over the next hour, Emily examined Benny more thoroughly. She noted his unusual bone structure, the alert intelligence in his eyes, and the way he reacted to subtle verbal cues. "There's something genetic here," she murmured. "Something rare. I've never seen a donkey respond to human direction with this level of anticipation. His reflexes, his problem-solving ability, it's extraordinary." Hannah listened, a mix of pride and apprehension swelling in her chest. Pride because Benny was indeed remarkable. Apprehension because she knew the word would spread quickly. Rare creatures attracted attention, and attention could be dangerous. Meanwhile, Luke took careful notes, capturing the interactions on camera. He asked questions about Hannah's daily routines, the life she led in the mountains, and how Benny had become a part of it all. Hannah answered cautiously, describing her garden, the forest trails, and the lessons her aunt had taught her, weaving in subtle details of Benny's intelligence without oversharing. Luke scribbled furiously, his notebook a blur of words, but he also recorded the quiet intimacy between Hannah and her donkey, sensing the emotional core that made the story compelling. As the morning unfolded, more townsfolk arrived, drawn by whispers of the unusual donkey. Some approached with curiosity, others with thinly veiled greed. A few children watched wide-eyed from a distance, pointing and whispering, while older men speculated about the donkey's potential value in livestock breeding or farming. The influx of visitors created a tension that Hannah hadn't experienced in years, and she felt the familiar stirrings of anxiety. Emily, sensing her friend's unease, placed a reassuring hand on Hannah's shoulder. "We'll manage this," she said softly. "We just need to observe, assess, and control what we can. He's remarkable, yes, but you control how the world sees him." Hannah nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle over her. Benny was no longer just a companion. He was a rare being whose life and the integrity of her own choices was now intertwined with the curiosity and ambitions of others. As midday approached, Hannah led Benny to a shaded area of the garden where he could graze and rest. She watched as he interacted with the environment, pushing aside small branches, sniffing plants, and showing a gentle, almost playful understanding of the world around him. His intelligence was evident in every motion, the way he adjusted his footing on uneven ground, the way he nudged fallen fruit toward her as if inviting her to share in discovery. Luke, unable to resist, asked if he could film Benny at close range. Hannah hesitated, then agreed under Emily's watchful eye. The camera captured subtle behaviors, a tilt of the head, the careful positioning of hooves, and the way Benny seemed to respond to unsaid cues. Hannah felt a strange mixture of pride and protectiveness. She wanted the world to see Benny's brilliance, but she also feared the attention it would inevitably bring. Later, Hannah retreated to the cabin to record her own observations, a habit she had maintained for years as a solitary chronicler of life in the mountains. She detailed Benny's intelligence, his playful tendencies, and his responsiveness to her commands. The act of writing helped her process the morning's events and solidified the sense that her life and Benny's was entering a new, uncharted chapter. By late afternoon, Luke had packed away his camera, but his presence lingered in conversation. "Hannah, this is bigger than just a story about a donkey," he said earnestly. "People are going to be interested, but I want to make sure it's told right, from your perspective. You have control over this narrative." Hannah considered his words. She was wary of fame and attention, yet the thought of shaping the story herself appealed to her pragmatic nature. "I'll think about it," she said cautiously. "I don't want anyone exploiting him or me." As visitors began to leave, the tension in the air softened, though Hannah's mind remained alert. She knew that news traveled quickly, and soon the story of Benny's intelligence and rare traits would extend far beyond the mountains. She felt a quiet resolve settle over her. She would protect Benny, control his exposure, and navigate this sudden intrusion into her life with careful deliberation. That evening, Hannah and Benny settled into the barn, the fading light casting long shadows across the clearing. Emily lingered a moment longer, helping feed the chickens and offering advice. "Keep notes, Hannah. Document everything. There's more to come. I can feel it," she said with a knowing look. Benny nudged Emily's hand gently, as if acknowledging her role as a trusted ally. Hannah sat in the doorway of the cabin, staring at Benny as he explored the hayloft, and felt the weight of responsibility pressing upon her. The quiet of the mountains had shifted subtly. The solitude she had known for decades was now shared with eyes both human and animal, curious and watchful. She allowed herself a rare moment of reflection, thinking of her Aunt Grace's words, "The smallest beings can teach the largest lessons." Benny was teaching her now, not only about companionship but about trust, morality, and the unexpected burdens of extraordinary fortune. Night fell over the Appalachian hills, and Hannah finally allowed herself to relax. She watched Benny settle into the straw, his eyes half closed but still alert, listening to the quiet sounds of the forest. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the faint echoes of curiosity, opportunity, and the distant promise of challenge. Hannah felt both apprehension and anticipation. Her life was no longer purely her own. It was entwined with Benny, with the visitors who had glimpsed his brilliance, and with the world outside the mountains that was beginning to take notice. As she closed her notebook and blew out the lantern, Hannah realized that the events of the day were only the beginning. The bond between her and Benny had already altered the rhythm of her life, and the curiosity of outsiders, though gentle for now, would inevitably bring both opportunity and danger. She took a deep breath, feeling the crisp mountain air fill her lungs, and whispered softly to Benny, "We'll face whatever comes together." Benny brayed softly in response, a sound full of life, intelligence, and promise. And as Hannah drifted into a light sleep, the Appalachian night enveloped them, holding secrets yet to be revealed. preparing the stage for the arrival of forces that would test her values, her courage, and her loyalty. In the quiet of the mountains, the extraordinary had begun, and the ripple of Benny's presence was poised to touch lives far beyond the forested hills. The following morning dawned crisp and clear, the Appalachian sunlight breaking through the mist like golden shards, illuminating Hannah Carter's small cabin nestled against the hills. The quiet of the mountains, usually a source of comfort, now carried an undercurrent of tension. Hannah moved through her garden with practiced ease, checking the sprouting vegetables and wildflowers, but her mind wasn't entirely on the task. Benny nickered softly, brushing against her leg, and she stroked his mane, drawing strength from his calm presence. The sound of tires crunching against gravel interrupted the morning stillness. Hannah's gaze lifted to see a sleek black SUV rounding the bend, its polished surface glinting in the sunlight. The vehicle's engine was silent as it rolled to a stop at the foot of the driveway. Hannah's heart skipped a beat. She had anticipated curiosity from townsfolk, journalists and friends, but this, she sensed, was different. The car radiated a kind of corporate authority. Its driver deliberate and purposeful, a man stepped from the SUV, tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that seemed almost absurd against the backdrop of rugged mountains and forest. His shoes were polished to a shine. His watch gleamed in the sunlight, and his gaze swept over the property with an air of ownership rather than courtesy. Ethan Hayes had arrived. Hannah Carter? His voice was smooth, confident, and polished, carrying the subtle persuasion of someone used to getting what he wanted. "I'm Ethan Hayes. I understand you've acquired a remarkable donkey." He gestured toward Benny, who had frozen mid-step, sensing the tension in the stranger's presence. Hannah remained in the garden, her hands steady on the rake she held. "That's right. This is Benny," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Is there something you need?" Ethan smiled, a measured, charming smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'd like to make you an offer, one that could change your life entirely." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Hannah's brow furrowed slightly. Offers from outsiders were rarely simple or benign, and she had learned over the years that charm often masked motives rooted in greed. "I'm not interested in selling him," she said firmly, her voice echoing across the clearing. Benny shifted closer, as if reinforcing her decision with his quiet presence. Ethan's smile didn't falter. If anything, it became sharper. "I anticipated as much. But let me explain. Benny isn't just any donkey. From what I've learned, through various sources, he carries a rare genetic trait, one that could revolutionize sustainable farming, improve livestock breeding, and generate immense wealth for anyone who recognizes his potential." Hannah's pulse quickened despite herself. She had suspected Benny was unusual, but she had not imagined the world outside the mountains would see him as a commodity. She tightened her grip on the rake. "He's my companion, my family. He's not for sale, and I won't allow him to be treated as some investment." Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly, his charm shifting into something colder, sharper. "I respect your attachment, truly, but let me be clear, the world is fast, and opportunities like this don't wait. If you refuse, there are others, corporate investors, scientific groups, opportunists, who won't hesitate. They'll take Benny from you, and you'll have no control over how he's used." Hannah's chest tightened. She knew he spoke the truth. Rare animals and their unique traits attracted attention, and her secluded life offered little protection from determined outsiders. Yet she refused to be cowed. "I decide how he lives. Not you, not anyone else. If you want him, you'll have to go through me, and I won't back down." Ethan's expression shifted, revealing the subtle impatience of someone used to bending people to his will. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "Hannah, I'm offering security, wealth, and influence. Think about what that could mean, not just for you, but for Benny. He could make a difference in the world. Don't you want that?" Hannah's mind raced. She had lived a life of solitude and self-sufficiency, untouched by ambition and wealth. Yet the temptation of opportunity was undeniable. She could see herself for a fleeting moment using Benny's rare abilities to improve lives, help the environment, or even leave a legacy. But the idea of sacrificing her principles, of allowing Benny to be exploited, filled her with unease. Emily Brooks, standing nearby, placed a calming hand on Hannah's shoulder. "Don't rush, Hannah. Listen, yes, but remember what's important. Benny's well-being and your values come first. Everything else is secondary." Her voice carried warmth and reason, anchoring Hannah in a world that suddenly felt dizzying in its potential. Ethan, sensing resistance, shifted tactics. "I understand your attachment," he said smoothly, "and I respect it. But let me make the stakes clear. Opportunities like this are fleeting. If you refuse, the next person won't. You could be left behind watching as Benny is taken advantage of, while you remain in the mountains doing, well, what you've always done." Hannah's heart thudded in her chest. The moral tension was palpable. On one hand, the promise of wealth and influence was tempting, luxury, security, the ability to make a broader impact. On the other hand, Benny's life, their bond, and the principles her late Aunt Grace had instilled in her were far more valuable than any sum of money. She took a deep breath, letting the mountain air fill her lungs, and made her stance clear. No amount of money is worth compromising his life or mine. Benny stays with me under my care in the mountains. If that isn't acceptable, then we are done. Ethan's smile tightened. He took a step back, hands clasped behind his back, and regarded Hannah with a mixture of admiration and calculation. "I admire your conviction," he said finally. "Most would sell in an instant. But remember, Hannah, fortune doesn't wait, and the world doesn't care about principles. It only cares about results." With that, he turned and returned to his SUV, the engine purring to life. Benny brayed, following the vehicle with his eyes, as if sensing the tension and the high stakes involved. Hannah watched him, a wave of relief mingled with apprehension washing over her. She had resisted, but she knew this encounter would not be the last. As the dust settled, Hannah retreated to the cabin, Emily trailing behind her. "That was intense," Emily said, setting down a basket of harvested vegetables. "He's relentless. And he's not the only one out there who'll be interested." Hannah nodded, moving to Benny and brushing his coat. "I know, but we'll face them. Together." Benny nudged her hand in reassurance, a silent affirmation of loyalty and trust. Later that afternoon, Anna sat on the porch, notebook in hand, recording every detail of the encounter. She documented Ethan's appearance, words and demeanor, as well as Benny's reactions. Writing helped her process the moral and emotional complexities of the situation. She realized that her life was no longer simple. Her decisions would carry weight far beyond the hills surrounding her cabin. Luke Morgan, who had stayed to observe, approached cautiously. "Hannah, you handled that remarkably. Most people would have crumbled under his pressure. I think people will respect your choice, but they'll also want to test it." Hannah looked up from her notebook, her eyes meeting his. "Test it how?" "By pushing boundaries," Luke said. "The more remarkable Benny proves to be, the more people will want him, or want to control him. You've got to be prepared for persistence, manipulation, and sometimes outright coercion." The warning settled over Hannah like a cloud, but she felt no fear, only resolve. She had chosen her path. Benny's life, her principles, and the sanctuary of the mountains were worth more than fleeting fortune. Yet she knew that navigating this new reality would require strategy, courage, and trust in her allies. Emily leaned against the porch railing, thoughtful. "We should start planning. Secure the barn, reinforce fences, and keep track of anyone who shows unusual interest. Knowledge and preparation are our best defenses." Benny brayed softly, stepping closer as if affirming Emily's words. Anna knelt beside him, running her hands along his sturdy back. She could feel the bond between them deepening, not just as caretaker and animal, but as partners in a world suddenly complicated and unpredictable. As dusk fell, Hannah reflected on the events of the day. Ethan Hayes represented more than a single threat. He embodied the outside world's fascination with rarity, profit, and control. The encounter had tested her morals, courage, and attachment to Benny, forcing her to confront the potential consequences of his extraordinary abilities. Yet it also solidified her commitment. She would protect him, guide him, and decide how their lives would unfold, not outsiders. Night settled over the mountains, the air crisp and filled with the earthy scent of pine and moss. Hannah lit a lantern in the cabin, Benny resting his head on her lap as she wrote her thoughts. She considered the possibilities: ethical research, sustainable farming, educational outreach, but all with one guiding principle: Benny's welfare and her values came first. Luke lingered nearby, notebook in hand, capturing moments unobtrusively. He understood that Hannah's story was not just about a rare donkey, but about integrity, courage, and the human-animal bond. His presence offered both documentation and subtle support, a reminder that not all outsiders sought to exploit. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Emily stayed longer, checking on the livestock and offering quiet counsel. Together, the three of them reviewed plans for protecting Benny, anticipating further visits and considering ethical ways to share his rare traits without compromising their safety or morals. By midnight, the cabin was silent, except for the occasional rustle of leaves outside. Hannah tucked her notebook away, feeling a profound mix of exhaustion, determination, and cautious hope. Benny lay in the straw beside her, his breathing steady, and she felt the comfort of their shared bond. Hannah understood that Ethan Hayes's visit was only the beginning. The world outside the Appalachian hills had begun to notice Benny, and with attention came opportunity, challenge, and danger. Yet she felt ready, rooted in her principles, supported by Emily and Luke, and connected deeply to the extraordinary donkey who had changed her life with a single $1 purchase. As she drifted to sleep, the mountains seemed to hum with anticipation. The stars above, witnesses to the quiet determination of a mountain woman and her remarkable companion. The next chapter of their lives was beginning, one that would test every value, every bond, and every choice they held dear. The morning light filtered through the dense canopy surrounding Hannah Carter's cabin, turning the forest floor into a patchwork of gold and shadow. Birds chirped, insects hummed, and the distant river whispered its familiar lullaby. Normally these sounds brought her peace. Today, they underscored a tension that had begun to thrum in the air ever since Ethan Hayes's visit. Even as she fed Benny and checked the small garden along the slope, Hannah couldn't shake the feeling that the mountains were no longer just hers. They were now a stage for forces she barely understood. Hannah had spent decades cultivating solitude, mastering the rhythms of the forest, the seasons, and her own routines. Her life had been predictable, controlled, and quiet. Yet in the span of a few weeks, the arrival of a tiny donkey had shifted her existence in ways she could never have foreseen. Benny, scrappy and endearing, had captured more than her heart. He had drawn attention from strangers, opportunists, and well-meaning allies alike. The question now was how to manage all of them without losing her way of life, or Benny. The first sign of intrusion came at dawn. A shadow passed beyond the tree line, and Hannah froze, sensing movement that didn't belong to the usual forest wildlife. Benny's ears twitched, nostrils flaring as he turned toward the sound. Before Hannah could move toward him, a vehicle emerged onto the dirt path, a white van with tinted windows, unassuming yet deliberate. Out stepped two individuals carrying clipboards and measuring tools. Their polite greetings did little to mask the sharpness in their eyes. The way they examined Benny from a distance, noting his size, posture, and the distinct curve of his legs, Hannah approached slowly, hands raised slightly in greeting. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone cautious but firm. "We're here to observe and document Benny's behavior," said the taller of the two, a thin man with round glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. "We've heard reports of his unique capabilities. We'd like your permission to conduct a few simple tests, nothing invasive, I assure you." Hannah's mind raced. Ethan's warning from days ago still lingered. She didn't trust these strangers. I don't give permission for anyone to experiment on him. Benny isn't for study. He's my companion. The woman beside the man nodded slowly. We understand. But scientific interest is strong. Rare traits like his are invaluable for research in sustainable farming. Perhaps we can work with you ethically, with oversight and no harm to Benny. Hannah's eyes flicked to Benny, who had wandered closer, brushing his snout against her hand as if seeking guidance. She felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. Her solitude had once been her shield. Now it was a liability. Before she could respond, a familiar voice called from the edge of the cabin. "Hannah, are you seeing this?" Emily Brooks had arrived, holding her stethoscope and a leather notebook, her brow furrowed in concern. I don't trust these people. Let me check Benny first. Hannah exhaled, grateful for her friend's presence. Do it, she said softly, stepping back to allow Emily to examine him. Emily crouched beside Benny, running gentle hands along his back, ears and hooves. He's fine physically, she said after a moment, but he's tense. He senses the intrusion. She looked up at Hannah. I'd recommend we establish boundaries immediately. Keep him close, keep him safe, and be wary of any promises that sound too good to be true. Hannah nodded, gratitude mingling with apprehension. The cabin had become a battleground, and she was the reluctant general. She glanced toward the forest line, considering the shadows among the trees. Some were clearly scientists or enthusiasts with honest intentions. Others might be opportunists, drawn by Benny's potential fortune. Differentiating between them would require vigilance, strategy, and alliances. Luke Morgan arrived shortly after, camera slung over his shoulder, notebook in hand. Morning, Hannah, he said, his tone light but observant. Looks like the word's spreading faster than I expected. How are you holding up? Hannah gestured toward Benny, who now stood quietly, ears swiveling in attention. Tense, she admitted. People keep coming, curious about him. I don't know who's here for the right reasons, or for profit, Luke nodded. We can document, but we need to protect him, and you. If we frame this as a story of ethical stewardship rather than exploitation, it might give you leverage. Transparency can be a defense, Hannah considered this. She had initially resisted the idea of being in the spotlight, but Luke's suggestion made sense. If the world saw Benny through her eyes, his intelligence, his loyalty, his gentle nature, it might curb some of the more exploitative attempts. At the same time, she knew the attention could be a double-edged sword. The first full week of intrusions was a balancing act. Hannah fortified her cabin, adding fences and secure stalls for Benny while maintaining paths and areas for him to roam safely. Emily stayed almost constantly, assisting with medical checks, monitoring health and offering counsel. Luke remained nearby, recording events and creating an archive of interactions, always careful to maintain Hannah's trust and privacy. Despite the chaos, the trio began forming a rhythm. Hannah's leadership became more assertive, her decisions strategic yet measured. She scheduled visits only for trusted allies, created codes to alert neighbors of potential threats, and began keeping detailed records of every interaction with outsiders. Her mountain home, once a place of pure solitude, had transformed into a hub of careful coordination. Yet intrusion wasn't limited to scientists or journalists. Opportunistic townsfolk, some driven by curiosity and some by envy, began to observe Hannah from the edges of the woods or along the winding mountain roads. Rumors of Benny's unique abilities swirled, some accurate, some exaggerated. The gossip threatened to strain the delicate trust Hannah had with her neighbors, forcing her to engage selectively and diplomatically. One afternoon, as the sun sank behind the peaks, a man approached carrying a crate filled with supplements and feed, claiming to be a distant relative of a local livestock expert. Hannah was wary, but Emily suggested a brief conversation to gauge intent. The man's manner, though superficially polite, was insistent and probing. He asked about Benny's diet, routines, and even hinted at investment opportunities. Hannah felt the tension coil in her stomach. After a polite refusal, the man left, muttering about lost chances. Hannah exhaled, leaning against the porch railing. Every day there's someone new, she said. Every day we're tested, Emily nodded. It's the price of rarity, Hannah. But it's also a chance to show people there's more to life than profit. She glanced at Benny, who nuzzled Hannah's hand. He's your reminder of that. Luke, ever the observer, suggested a strategic alliance. Hannah, there are people in town who can help protect you. Neighbors who respect your autonomy and understand the mountains. If we coordinate, we can create a network that discourages opportunists while promoting ethical interest. Hannah thought carefully. The idea of building alliances with townsfolk went against her instinct for solitude, but necessity outweighed comfort. She began identifying trustworthy individuals, quietly reaching out to them for assistance. Some offered practical help, fencing materials, watchful eyes, or advice on security. Others contributed knowledge of livestock and genetics, helping Hannah understand Benny's abilities better without exploiting him. Over the next few days, the cabin became a controlled yet lively center of activity. Benny demonstrated his intelligence in subtle ways, helping Emily fetch supplies, alerting Hannah to intruders with quiet brays, and even learning simple tasks that amazed onlookers. Each demonstration, while small, reinforced the idea that Benny's value was more than monetary. It was ethical, educational, and emotional. Tension remained high. News of Benny's abilities had reached social media through Luke's careful reporting. While he highlighted Hannah's stewardship and Benny's uniqueness, some viewers were eager to capitalize. Emails, phone calls, and even unannounced visitors began to arrive, testing boundaries Hannah had set. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the mountains were bathed in twilight, a larger group of people arrived uninvited. They included a mix of journalists, scientists, and curious townsfolk, all drawn by the escalating story of a miraculous donkey. Hannah, with Emily's counsel, welcomed only those she recognized as trustworthy and politely turned the rest away. Benny, calm and intelligent, seemed to sense the distinction, behaving reservedly around strangers, but relaxed among familiar faces. Hannah began maintaining structured routines. Mornings were spent in the garden and with Benny, afternoons in secure observation and careful documentation, and evenings in planning or reviewing footage with Luke. Emily's role was multifaceted. Caretaker, advisor, and mediator between Hannah and the world outside. Benny, ever observant, became both participant and anchor, reinforcing the moral center of every interaction. Despite the busyness, moments of quiet reflection persisted. Hannah often walked the wooded trails with Benny, discussing small matters aloud, a habit formed from decades of solitude. She thought of her late Aunt Grace, whose wisdom had guided her in solitude and whose letters had taught lessons in responsibility and moral clarity. Grace's teachings, pragmatic, ethical, and centered on respect for life, resonated now more than ever. Through these interactions, Hannah discovered new dimensions of leadership and moral decision-making. She had to balance external pressures, protect her companion, navigate ethical dilemmas, and maintain the trust of her allies, all while preserving her autonomy and the simple life she cherished. The mountains, once a refuge, had become a proving ground. By the end of the week, Hannah had emerged more confident and resolute. She had identified threats, nurtured alliances, and understood that protecting Benny was as much about managing relationships as safeguarding his physical well-being. Emily and Luke remained her closest confidants, providing practical assistance and perspective. Benny, in his quiet intelligence, had become the unspoken center around which all these decisions revolved. As night fell, Hannah stood on the porch, the mountains silhouetted against a sky streaked with stars. The events of the past days weighed on her, yet a sense of quiet triumph settled over her. She had navigated intrusion without compromise, built alliances without surrendering independence, and safeguarded Benny without resorting to fear. The mountains whispered around her, familiar and eternal, yet subtly changed. The intrusion of outsiders had tested her principles, her courage, and her leadership, but it had also revealed a strength she hadn't fully recognized in herself. She realized that the days ahead would demand even more vigilance and wisdom, yet she felt ready. Benny nudged her hand, and she smiled, feeling the deep, unspoken bond between them. Whatever challenges awaited, be it corporate greed, scientific curiosity, or opportunistic neighbors, she would face them with clarity, courage, and compassion. The network of alliances she had begun to build offered a buffer, a support system rooted in trust and shared values. And at the heart of it all was Benny, the tiny donkey whose presence had forever altered the rhythm of her life. Hannah retreated. Inside, the cabin warm and inviting against the night chill. Luke reviewed notes and footage, Emily organized supplies, and Benny settled comfortably on the straw near the hearth. The quiet hum of life, punctuated by distant wildlife, wrapped around them, a fragile but resilient harmony. Tonight, the mountains seemed less solitary, less uncertain. Hannah knew that tomorrow would bring new tests, new visitors, and new challenges, but she also understood that her principles, alliances, and the bond with Benny provided a foundation strong enough to withstand intrusion and temptation alike. As she extinguished the lantern and closed the cabin door, Hannah allowed herself a moment of peace. The forest sighed around her, protective and familiar, as if acknowledging the mountain woman's resolve. The intrusion had been met, the alliances had been formed, and at the heart of it all, Benny remained her partner, her companion, and her greatest teacher in courage, loyalty, and ethical stewardship. The next chapter promised challenges beyond anything she had yet faced, but Hannah Carter, mountain woman and guardian of a remarkable donkey, was ready. The night had fallen thick over the Appalachian Mountains, the dense forest swallowing every sound except the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant gurgle of the river. Hannah Carter sat on the porch of her cabin, Benny grazing quietly nearby, his ears flicking toward every sound that broke the nighttime stillness. She had grown accustomed to the quiet, the subtle rhythms of the mountains, and the gentle companionship of her donkey. Yet tonight, an undercurrent of unease gnawed at her. Something in the air didn't feel right, an instinct honed by decades of solitary living that warned her of unseen threats. Emily Brooks, ever vigilant, emerged from the cabin, her lantern casting a soft glow across the yard. "You okay?" she asked softly, crouching beside Benny to run a gentle hand over his neck. Hannah nodded, though her eyes remained fixed on the tree line. "Something's off," she admitted. "I can feel it, like eyes in the dark." Emily followed her gaze. "We've been careful. Fences, alarms, schedules. But people are persistent when money is involved." The truth of Emily's words settled over Hannah like a cold weight. Ever since Ethan Hayes had made his audacious offer and been refused, there had been a shift. Opportunists, journalists, and a sprinkling of unethical researchers had begun testing boundaries, probing the perimeters of her mountain sanctuary. The network of allies she had begun forming offered protection, yes, but the potential for intrusion remained. Hannah walked toward Benny, placing a hand gently on his scruffy head. "We'll handle it," she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. "Whatever comes, we'll handle it." And then came the sound she had been dreading, the crunch of boots on the dirt path leading to her cabin, heavy and deliberate. It wasn't the casual shuffle of a curious neighbor or a timid researcher. It was purposeful, coordinated. Benny stiffened, braying softly, a sound that seemed to echo off the surrounding trees. Hannah's heart quickened. She glanced at Emily, whose face was set in a mask of concentration. "They're here," Hannah whispered, before either woman could move. Shadowy figures emerged from the darkness, men in dark jackets, some carrying sacks and tools. Their presence was uninvited, and the intent behind it was unmistakable. "Step back," Hannah said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline thrumming through her veins. "This is my property. Leave." One of the men chuckled, a low, cruel sound that carried across the yard. "We're not here to play nice," he said, stepping forward. "We're here for the animal." Emily moved closer to Hannah, positioning herself between the intruders and Benny. "You'll leave him alone," she said firmly. Her hands twitched toward the small medical kit at her side, though the gesture was more symbolic than threatening. Hannah didn't wait for negotiation. She had anticipated confrontation and had quietly armed herself with a series of alarms and noisemakers hidden around the cabin. At her signal, a loud siren burst from the tree line, startling the intruders. Benny brayed loudly, circling Hannah protectively, his intelligence and loyalty shining in the moment. The sound attracted attention from neighbors who had agreed to act as watchers. Their presence, along with the siren, forced the men to hesitate. But hesitation was temporary. One of the intruders lunged toward Benny's stall, trying to grab the donkey. Hannah reacted instinctively, stepping between them and swinging a heavy lantern. The intruder recoiled, surprised by her ferocity. Emily grabbed a nearby shovel, joining Hannah in the defense. Benny brayed again, nudging the intruder with surprising strength, as if understanding the gravity of the moment. The confrontation was chaotic, yet brief, with shouts from the hidden neighbors and the loud alarm echoing through the forest. The intruders realized they were outnumbered and overpowered. They fled, disappearing into the dark woods, leaving Hannah, Emily, and Benny unharmed but shaken. Hannah sank onto the porch steps, running her hands through Benny's mane. "That was too close," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "They'll be back." Emily nodded, her face grim. "They might, but we have time now to fortify further, secure the gates, reinforce the stalls, maybe even add a few deterrents along the path. And we need to alert Luke. He should document this, show the stakes clearly." Hannah exhaled, realizing that their peaceful mountain life had shifted irreversibly. Benny, her companion, was now the center of a storm she hadn't sought, but could not ignore. His rare abilities, once a curiosity, were now a magnet for greed and exploitation. Protecting him was no longer a choice. It was a responsibility she could not shirk. The next morning, Hannah and Emily began reinforcing the cabin perimeter. They installed additional fencing, creating a secondary enclosure around Benny's area, and set up simple noise alarms to detect movement along the forest edge. Luke arrived with his camera and notebook, documenting every detail of the intrusion, while also offering ideas for security measures and public transparency. "People need to see this," Luke said. "Not to expose your privacy, but to understand what's at stake. If the public knows there's a real threat, it might deter future intrusions." Hannah hesitated. The idea of exposure made her uneasy, but the alternative, secret vulnerability, felt far worse. "We'll be careful," she said finally. "Only the essentials, only what's necessary to protect Benny." As the day wore on, Hannah reflected on the nature of the threat. Ethan Hayes had set these events in motion. His greed had opened the door to a cascade of intrusions, some opportunistic, some potentially dangerous. Hannah realized she could no longer operate in isolation. She needed a strategy that combined vigilance, alliances, and ethical guidance. Emily was a constant presence, her calm and rational perspective grounding Hannah. "You're not alone in this," Emily reminded her. "Benny has you, and you have allies who respect the mountains and your values. That counts for more than you think." Benny, seemingly aware of the conversation, nudged Hannah's hand and brayed softly. His intelligence was astonishing. He seemed to understand the urgency of the situation, the danger lurking at the edges of their lives. Each day he learned and adapted, showing skills and awareness that went beyond ordinary animals. In the days that followed, Hannah established a more formal routine. She began keeping logs of every visitor, every event and every unusual occurrence. She trained Benny on subtle cues to alert her of movement near the cabin, enhancing their mutual understanding and responsiveness. Emily taught him basic tasks that could help in emergencies, turning him into a proactive partner in his own protection. Luke's reporting became a measured tool. Rather than sensationalize the story, he focused on Hannah's ethical stewardship, the uniqueness of Benny, and the intrusions they had faced. His coverage struck a delicate balance, deterring opportunists while garnering support from those who valued ethical treatment and sustainable practices. Hannah also reached out to select townsfolk, identifying those who could be trusted to watch over the property or assist in emergencies. She found allies in unlikely places: a retired farmer who knew the terrain intimately, a craftsman capable of building secure enclosures, and a neighbor skilled in local law enforcement protocol. Each alliance strengthened her position and expanded the protective network around Benny. Despite the increasing vigilance, Hannah could feel the strain. The constant alertness, the planning, and the moral weight of responsibility for Benny's safety and well-being pressed heavily on her. At night, she would sit on the porch, Benny at her side, and reflect on the life she had once known. A life of quiet solitude, uninterrupted by the outside world. That life was gone, yet in its place. A new purpose had emerged: to safeguard Benny, to act ethically, and to navigate the treacherous intersection of fortune and morality. It was during one such quiet evening, as the forest settled into darkness, that Hannah received a message from an anonymous source, a warning of increased activity from corporate agents and intruders. The note included details only someone closely monitoring the situation could know. The message was a stark reminder that Ethan Hayes' influence extended far beyond a single visit. Hannah shared the note with Emily and Luke. "This changes nothing," she said firmly. "We reinforce, we protect, and we stay ahead. Benny comes first, always." Emily placed a hand on her shoulder. "And we'll do it together. You don't have to carry this alone." Luke nodded. "We'll make sure the world sees your choices, your integrity, your courage. That counts too." The first crisis had arrived, violent and immediate, testing Hannah's courage, resourcefulness, and leadership. Yet as she watched Benny nuzzle Emily's shoulder, she knew that the bond she shared with the donkey, the support of her allies, and her own growing resolve were more formidable than any intruder. As the night deepened and the wind rustled through the Appalachian trees, Hannah felt a mixture of exhaustion and determination. The intrusion had been a wake-up call. The world beyond her mountains was watching, and she would need to navigate it carefully, ethically, and strategically. But one truth remained unshakable: Benny was hers, and she would defend him no matter the cost. The Appalachian night stretched endlessly, yet Hannah found a sliver of peace. She would face tomorrow as she had faced every challenge in her life, with clarity, courage, and unwavering loyalty. The first crisis had passed, but the journey was far from over. And at the heart of it all, Benny remained, small yet extraordinary, steadfast and intelligent, a reminder of the responsibilities and possibilities that fortune could bring. The mountains stood silent witnesses to their vigil, ancient and enduring, as Hannah, Emily, and Benny prepared for the days to come, knowing that the storm of intrusion and opportunity was only beginning. The sun rose over the Appalachian ridges, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers over the valley. Hannah Carter stood on the edge of her porch, watching Benny graze in the dew-soaked grass. The events of the previous week, Ethan Hayes' aggressive attempts, the break-in, the media attention, had left their mark. Her cabin, once a haven of solitude, now felt like a small island amid a swelling tide of outside interests. The mountain air was crisp, fragrant with pine and damp earth, yet even its clarity could not mask the gnawing uncertainty in her mind. Emily emerged from the cabin with a thermos of coffee, her brow furrowed in concern. "You've been staring at the woods for an hour," she said, offering Hannah a steaming cup. "What's going through your mind?" Hannah accepted the cup, her fingers wrapped around its warmth. Everything, she admitted. Benny, the intrusions, the scientists, Luke's footage. It's not just about him anymore. It's about the life I've built and what I'm willing to compromise. Emily nodded, taking a sip of her own coffee. This is the point where choices matter. You can't just react. You need a strategy. Moral, practical, and sustainable. Hannah watched Benny as he playfully nudged a fallen branch toward her, braying softly. His innocent intelligence was a reminder of what she was protecting. The donkey had become more than a companion. He was the focal point of ethical, social, and personal dilemmas. His rare genetic traits, once a curiosity, were now a potential key to sustainable agriculture, something that could transform farming, but only if handled responsibly. Luke Morgan arrived shortly after, his notebook and camera slung over his shoulder, his expression eager yet cautious. "Morning," he said, setting his equipment down on the porch railing. "I've been thinking about how we handle this story. The public is fascinated, but if we don't control the narrative, Ethan and others will twist it for their gain." Hannah exhaled, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. "That's exactly it. I need to decide how much of this life I want to share, and with whom. Benny's safety comes first, but there's also a chance to do something good, something meaningful." Emily stepped closer, her voice firm yet empathetic. "Hannah, you're at a moral crossroads. You can sell out and take the money, collaborate with ethical researchers, or stay isolated. Each path has consequences, and none are without cost. But you don't have to figure it out alone." Hannah nodded slowly, realizing the truth in Emily's words. Her mind drifted to the letters and journals left by her late aunt, Grace Carter, who had raised her after her parents' death. Grace had always emphasized integrity, self-reliance, and the importance of considering the long-term impact of one's actions. Hannah could almost hear her aunt's voice echoing in the morning air. "Fortune may knock at your door, but character defines whether you open it." The first ethical choice presented itself almost immediately. A team of agricultural scientists had requested a formal meeting, proposing to study Benny's unique abilities under controlled, ethical conditions. The project promised to benefit sustainable farming worldwide, but it also meant exposing Benny to scrutiny and experimentation. Hannah knew that if she agreed, she would have to trust these strangers with her beloved companion, balancing the potential benefits against the risks to his well-being. Emily stayed close as they met with the scientists in the cabin's makeshift living room. Charts, genetic data, and research proposals were spread across the table. The team, led by Dr. Karen Fields, was earnest and methodical, emphasizing transparency, ethics, and the welfare of Benny. "We understand your concerns," Dr. Fields said. "Our goal isn't to exploit him for profit. We want to learn from his abilities to help farmers around the world adopt more sustainable practices." Hannah listened intently, her eyes flicking between the scientists and Benny. The donkey tilted his head, observing the room with intelligence that seemed almost human. Emily gave Hannah's hand a reassuring squeeze, her silent support reinforcing the gravity of the decision before them. Luke, taking notes and filming discreetly, added perspective. "If you agree, you control the narrative. You set boundaries. It's a chance to make this story about ethics, not greed." Yet Hannah's mind also wandered to Ethan Hayes, whose presence had loomed over the past days. He represented a stark alternative: wealth without responsibility, power without conscience. The temptation was immense, money that could transform her home, her life, and perhaps even the local community. But the cost, she knew instinctively, would be compromise of her values and the risk to Benny. As the meeting concluded, Hannah requested time to think. She walked outside with Benny trailing close, feeling the morning sun on her face. Her solitude had been a source of clarity for decades, and now it became the space in which she weighed morality against opportunity. She recalled the break-in, the fear, the adrenaline, the instinctive protective bond she had shared with Benny and Emily. The stakes were no longer abstract. They were immediate and tangible. Protecting Benny wasn't just about keeping him safe. It was about upholding the principles of loyalty, compassion, and ethical responsibility. The next hours were spent in reflection. Hannah revisited Grace Carter's journals, noting passages about making decisions guided by integrity rather than convenience. She scribbled in her own notebook, documenting her fears, hopes, and the potential outcomes of each path. Benny, as if sensing her inner turmoil, stayed close, occasionally nudging her hand with his soft muzzle. Emily suggested a practical step, a trial collaboration with the scientists. "We don't have to commit fully," she said. "We can set terms, observe the process, and ensure Benny's welfare is prioritized. You can walk away if it feels wrong." Hannah considered this carefully. It offered a balance between action and caution, opportunity and ethical integrity. She realized that choosing the middle path wouldn't be easy. External pressures would continue, public attention would grow, and Ethan Hayes was unlikely to give up. But it preserved the core of what mattered, Benny's safety and the values she held dear. Luke added his perspective, his voice tinged with admiration. "You're shaping this story on your terms. Most people would have panicked or sold out. You're thinking long-term, morally and practically. That counts for a lot." Hannah felt a measure of reassurance, though the weight of responsibility didn't lessen. She knew that in the coming days she would have to navigate media exposure, corporate interest, and community expectations with careful precision. Each decision carried consequences, and each action would be scrutinized by eyes both supportive and opportunistic. That afternoon, as they implemented minor security enhancements around the cabin, a subtle shift occurred. Benny, always observant, began demonstrating new behaviors, nudging tools back into place, alerting Hannah to subtle changes in the environment, and even guiding Emily to a spot where a fence post had loosened. His intelligence and responsiveness underscored the importance of the ethical choices before Hannah. Benny wasn't just an animal. He was a partner, a moral compass, and a teacher in the subtle dynamics of trust, responsibility, and ethical stewardship. As evening fell, Hannah finally made her decision. She would allow the scientists to study Benny under strict conditions, with oversight and ethical guidelines firmly established. At the same time, she would maintain privacy measures, fortify her property, and keep a close network of allies to protect against opportunistic threats. The choice balanced morality with opportunity, caution with action. Emily, standing beside her on the porch, smiled. "It's the right decision. You're protecting him and doing something good for the world at the same time." Luke raised his camera, capturing the moment not as a spectacle, but as documentation of a woman exercising moral courage and careful judgment. "This will tell people what integrity looks like," he said softly. As Hannah watched Benny grazing in the golden evening light, she felt a profound sense of purpose. The moral crossroads had been navigated, not by avoiding responsibility, but by embracing it fully, ethically, thoughtfully, and courageously. She had chosen not only to protect her companion, but to act as a guardian of possibility, steering the potential for fortune toward responsibility and long-term good. The Appalachian night settled around them, rich with the scent of pine and the quiet hum of life. Hannah knew that challenges would continue, that Ethan Hayes and others would not simply disappear, that the world beyond the mountains had its own pressures and temptations. Yet for the first time in days, she felt a deep certainty. She had made a choice, aligned with her values, one that preserved her integrity while embracing opportunity responsibly. And in that quiet, reflective moment, as Benny nudged her hand and brayed softly, Hannah understood something fundamental. Life's fortune is not only measured in dollars or recognition, it is measured in the strength of one's choices, the loyalty of companions, and the courage to act ethically when temptation and pressure converge. The moral crossroads had been crossed, and though the journey ahead promised further challenges, Hannah Carter was ready to meet them with clarity, courage, and an unwavering commitment to integrity. The mountains, ancient and eternal, stood witness to her decision, embracing her as both a protector and a steward, guiding her as she navigated the intersection of fortune, morality, and the unexpected responsibilities that had come with a $1 donkey. The dawn broke over the Appalachian ridges like a soft promise, painting the valley in warm golds and muted greens. Hannah Carter stood on her porch, a sense of quiet determination settling in her chest. Today was not merely another day of grazing Benny or tending her garden. It was the day she had anticipated with both apprehension and resolve. Ethan Hayes had announced he would return, and this time it was clear he meant business. Not subtle business. Legal threats, hired agents, and veiled intimidation, all tools in his arsenal, were likely on their way. Yet Hannah was ready. She wasn't just defending her home or her donkey anymore. She was defending her principles, the life she had built, and the integrity of her choices. Emily Brooks, ever vigilant and pragmatic, approached with a thermos of coffee and a reassuring smile. "You look like you're preparing for battle," she teased lightly, though her eyes betrayed concern. "You've got this, but remember, strategy first." Hannah returned a small smile, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It's not just about defense. It's about showing them, and anyone who thinks they can exploit him, that we won't be manipulated." Luke Morgan arrived a few minutes later, camera slung over his shoulder, his expression a mix of excitement and concern. "I'll document everything," he said. "No one will spin this against you, and you'll get the story out exactly how you want it." Benny, as if sensing the tension, wandered near Hannah's side, his ears twitching attentively. He nudged her hand with his soft muzzle, as though offering reassurance that he would face whatever came together with her. Hannah knelt to scratch behind his ears, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing settle her own nerves. By mid-morning, Ethan Hayes' sleek black SUV appeared on the winding mountain road, kicking up dust as it approached the cabin. The vehicle came to a halt near the edge of the property, and a group of sharply dressed men in suits disembarked, exuding confidence and subtle menace. Ethan himself stepped forward, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the rugged mountain environment. His smile charming but cold, eyes glinting with calculation. "Hannah," he called, his voice smooth and commanding. "I've come to discuss terms. I'm sure you'll see reason this time. Benny could change everything for you." "For all of us." Hannah stepped forward, her stance calm and grounded. "I've considered your terms, Ethan, but Benny isn't for sale, and I won't allow him to be exploited." Ethan's smile faltered slightly, replaced by a sharper edge. "You're making a mistake. There are others, scientists, investors, who would pay handsomely for him. You could live comfortably for the rest of your life. I can live comfortably with my integrity intact," Hannah replied evenly, her voice firm. "Benny isn't just an animal to be commodified. He's my companion, and I won't allow anyone to manipulate that." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "You're stubborn, I'll give you that. But stubbornness won't protect you forever." Luke, standing nearby with his camera, captured the exchange, careful to remain unobtrusive while documenting the intensity of the confrontation. Emily, meanwhile, positioned herself between Hannah and Ethan, a subtle but firm presence that communicated unwavering support. Then came the first escalation. One of Ethan's agents stepped toward Benny, ostensibly to inspect him. The donkey brayed sharply, stepping protectively between Hannah and the man, his intelligence and intuition clear in his every movement. He didn't panic. He assessed, reacted, and positioned himself strategically. Benny's behavior startled the agent, who froze mid-step, realizing this was no ordinary animal. Hannah seized the moment. "You see? He's not just unique. He's aware, he's intelligent, and he has a mind of his own. He isn't property, and I will not negotiate over him," Emily added firmly. "Any attempt to force or coerce will have consequences. We are prepared to protect him and ourselves." Ethan's expression hardened, but he masked it with a practiced smile. "Very well. Perhaps we need a demonstration to truly understand his potential." Hannah tilted her head, cautious. A demonstration? Yes, Ethan said, gesturing broadly. Show us what makes him so valuable. Let the world see why he's worth more than a simple price tag. Hannah considered the offer carefully. It was risky, certainly, but a public demonstration, on her terms, could shift the narrative, exposing Ethan's manipulative tactics while highlighting Benny's abilities ethically. She glanced at Emily and Luke, who nodded subtly, signaling trust and support. Journey from the flea market to this point. The impulse purchase of a tiny donkey for $1 had set off a cascade of events she could never have anticipated. Yet in every twist, every moral decision, and every challenge, she recognized the threads of her own values guiding the outcome. Integrity, compassion, and loyalty had not only protected Benny, they had also shaped the opportunities that now unfolded before her. One afternoon, a small group of local children arrived, invited by Hannah to observe Benny and learn about animal care and sustainable farming. Benny, ever perceptive, responded to their tentative gestures with gentle curiosity, allowing them to pet him, feed him, and watch as he solved simple tasks designed to stimulate his intelligence. The children's laughter and fascination filled the air, blending with the scent of pine and the warmth of the sun. Hannah knelt beside them, explaining not just the mechanics of the tasks, but the importance of empathy, responsibility, and respect for living creatures. Emily watched from a short distance, smiling. "You're inspiring the next generation," she whispered. "They'll remember this. And so will you. This is the legacy you're building." Hannah nodded, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. Legacy, she realized, wasn't about wealth or recognition. It was about stewardship, guidance, and the careful cultivation of values. Benny, in his quiet intelligence and playful demeanor, was both a partner and a symbol of that principle. Media requests continued to arrive, but Hannah maintained strict control. Interviews were conducted in ways that emphasized ethical research and community benefits, not sensationalism. Luke's documentary footage highlighted these themes, ensuring that Hannah's story remained authentic and grounded. Visitors, both local and from farther afield, were guided through the process of understanding Benny's abilities and the principles underlying their use. Despite the successes, challenges persisted. Some opportunists still tried to maneuver behind the scenes, attempting to push for access or influence. Hannah, however, had grown confident in setting boundaries. She consulted with Emily and Luke before responding, ensuring that every interaction protected Benny and reinforced her ethical framework. Each decision was a test of her leadership, a measure of how well she could balance opportunity with responsibility. By late summer, Hannah's initiatives began to take tangible form. She partnered with ethical organizations to pilot sustainable farming projects, incorporating Benny's unique abilities in ways that enhanced productivity without exploitation. Workshops and educational programs flourished, bringing children, townsfolk, and researchers together in hands-on learning experiences. Hannah's cabin became a hub of thoughtful innovation, a place where curiosity and integrity coexisted. Evenings were spent quietly with Benny, walking the familiar trails through the mountains, reflecting on the day's events, and enjoying the simple pleasures of forest life. Hannah realized that while the world had expanded, the core of her existence, the forest, the mountains, the quiet companionship of Benny, remained unchanged. She had learned that growth and opportunity need not come at the expense of values, and that true fortune included not just wealth, but purpose, connection, and ethical responsibility. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridges, painting the sky in deep shades of amber and purple, Hannah sat on her porch, Benny at her side. Emily joined her, bringing tea and a quiet smile. "You've done something remarkable," Emily said softly. "Not just with Benny, but with all of this, the community, the ethics, the education. You've turned a challenge into a legacy." Hannah stroked Benny's mane, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing against her hand. "I never expected this," she admitted. "A wonder donkey. Who knew he would change so much?" Emily laughed lightly. "Some things can't be predicted. But you've guided them with heart, patience, and wisdom. Luke, observing from a short distance, added, and you've shown that integrity matters more than profit. People notice that. They follow that example. Hannah nodded, gazing out over the mountains. The path ahead remained filled with challenges, media attention, and ethical decisions. But she also saw opportunity to inspire, to teach, and to ensure that Benny's abilities contributed to the greater good. The mountain air was calm, the forest alive, and the bond between human and animal stronger than ever. In that quiet, reflective moment, Hannah realized that new beginnings were not merely about change. They were about growth grounded in values. Benny, Emily, Luke, and the supportive townsfolk formed a network that balanced ambition with responsibility, curiosity with care, and fortune with integrity. And in the fading light of the Appalachian sunset, Hannah understood that the life she had known and the opportunities now unfolding were not in conflict. They were complementary, each enriching the other. The journey was far from over. But for the first time, Hannah felt a deep sense of balance between simplicity and influence, solitude and community, responsibility and opportunity. Benny nuzzled her hand, as if affirming the promise of the future, and Hannah smiled, confident that together they could navigate whatever came next. The mountains stretched endlessly around them, a timeless witness to the life Hannah had built and the ethical legacy she was creating. And in that enduring landscape, the promise of new beginnings and the quiet triumph of integrity shone as brightly as the morning sun. The first rays of morning light filtered through the dense Appalachian canopy, casting golden streaks across Hannah Carter's cabin porch. The mountain air smelled faintly of pine, damp soil, and the promise of autumn. Yet the serenity that had once defined Hannah's mornings now carried a quiet tension. Word of Benny's rare abilities had spread far beyond the small town. Articles, social media posts, and news segments highlighted the scrappy $1 donkey who had captured hearts with his intelligence, loyalty, and uncanny agricultural potential. Requests and proposals flooded in from ethical researchers, educational organizations, and even international foundations. But with attention came responsibility, and with responsibility came a new kind of pressure. Hannah sipped her coffee, her gaze on Benny as he grazed in the meadow near the cabin. His ears flicked at the distant hum of approaching vehicles. "Looks like today's going to be busy," she murmured. Benny tilted his head, as if understanding her words, and ambled closer, nudging her hand with his nose. His gentle presence grounded her, reminding her that despite the whirlwind, some things remained unchanged: trust, care, and the bond she shared with this small, extraordinary creature. Emily Brooks appeared shortly after, her satchel filled with schedules, proposals, and a growing list of tasks. "Good morning," Emily greeted, her tone a mixture of excitement and concern. "We've got ethical agricultural researchers arriving from the state university, a local foundation interested in funding sustainable projects, and several media crews requesting interviews. Oh, and Luke's here, wanting to finalize the initial documentary footage." Hannah exhaled slowly. "We need to set boundaries," she said, her voice firm but measured. "Benny comes first. Everything else is secondary. We can't let this attention overwhelm us, or him." Emily nodded, placing the documents on the porch railing. "Agreed. But some of these opportunities are exactly what you've been hoping for. The chance to use Benny's abilities responsibly, to help the community, to create programs that matter." Before Hannah could respond, Luke Morgan arrived, camera slung over his shoulder, notebook in hand. "Morning, Hannah," he said, his eyes bright with anticipation. "I've organized the footage from last week. People are already reacting to the story. They see integrity, compassion, and innovation. Your story resonates far beyond the mountains." Hannah smiled faintly. "I still can't believe a $1 donkey would bring all this attention." Luke chuckled. "Well, some stories choose their storytellers. But this is your chance to guide how it's told." As the morning progressed, Hannah and Emily worked to organize the arrivals. The State University researchers were first, a team of 4, each with expertise in genetics, sustainable farming, and animal cognition. They brought notebooks, cameras, and a palpable sense of excitement. Benny, ever perceptive, greeted them cautiously but with curiosity, sniffing hands and following gentle commands with a precision that left the researchers visibly impressed. "His coordination and responsiveness are remarkable," said Dr. Karen Mitchell, the team's lead geneticist. "We've never observed a donkey with this level of problem-solving and adaptability. If our preliminary tests confirm our suspicions, his genetic traits could offer significant insights into sustainable farming techniques." Hannah listened carefully, her eyes on Benny. "I want to make sure he's comfortable," she said. "No pressure, no overworking him. Everything we do should respect his well-being." Emily nodded in agreement. "That's the rule here. We protect him first. Everything else comes second." Luke quietly filmed the interactions, capturing Benny's gentle yet intelligent demeanor. His voiceover notes highlighted not just Benny's abilities, but Hannah's ethical stewardship, emphasizing how responsibility, care, and compassion could coexist with opportunity. By mid-morning, a local foundation arrived with an offer to fund a small, sustainable farming initiative in the town, using Benny's unique abilities as the centerpiece. The proposal included educational programs, workshops for children, and grants for farmers experimenting with innovative, eco-friendly practices. Hannah studied the documents, feeling both excitement and apprehension. Accepting meant opening her home to further attention, yet it also offered a chance to make a meaningful impact. "Do you think this is too much?" Hannah asked Emily as she reviewed the proposal. Emily smiled reassuringly. "It's a lot, yes, but it's the right kind of opportunity. You set the boundaries, you decide how involved Benny is, and the foundation seems genuinely interested in supporting ethical programs, not exploiting him." Hannah exhaled, her thoughts drifting to the early days with Benny. From the flea market pen to the quiet walks in the woods, she had never imagined that this tiny, scrappy donkey would become the center of something so consequential. Yet, the essence of it all remained the same. Benny's intelligence, loyalty, and unique abilities, combined with her guiding principles, were shaping a new reality. Later that afternoon, Hannah convened a small meeting with Luke, Emily, and representatives from the foundation. They discussed logistics, ethical considerations, and educational strategies. Benny watched from nearby, occasionally braying softly, as if weighing in on the conversation. "Education is key," Hannah said, her tone decisive. "We want children and townsfolk to understand the responsibilities that come with caring for animals and using natural resources wisely. This isn't just about showcasing Benny's abilities, it's about fostering a culture of respect, empathy, and innovation." Luke nodded, jotting notes in his notebook. "And we can document it in a way that emphasizes those values, showing the public that ethical stewardship is possible, even with extraordinary opportunities." Emily added, "We'll need to manage visitors carefully. Benny's comfort and routine come first. We can structure programs that are interactive but safe, ensuring everyone learns without overwhelming him." The discussions continued late into the afternoon, punctuated by breaks when Benny would amble, up to Hannah for reassurance or a gentle scratch behind the ears. His calm presence served as a reminder that despite the whirlwind of proposals, interviews, and ethical debates, the core of Hannah's life, care, trust, and companionship, remained unchanged. As evening approached, Hannah stepped outside, watching the sun dip behind the Appalachian ridges. The landscape was a familiar comfort, a constant amidst the evolving circumstances of her life. She thought of the path that had led her here, from the flea market to the discovery of Benny's rare traits, to the confrontations with opportunists, and now to the unexpected opportunities that offered both influence and responsibility. Emily joined her, carrying 2 steaming mugs of tea. "You look thoughtful," she said, setting a mug beside Hannah. I am, Hannah admitted. It's a lot to process. So many people want something. From Benny, from me, from the story. And I want to do it right. I want to make a difference without losing ourselves, or him. Emily nodded, her expression gentle but firm. That's why you're the right person for this. You've always cared more about values than profit, about connection over attention. And now you have the chance to shape this story, to guide it with integrity. Just remember, boundaries, Hannah. Benny comes first. Always. Hannah smiled, raising her mug. To boundaries and to doing the right thing. To doing the right thing, Emily echoed, clinking her mug against Hannah's. That night, as Hannah sat by the fire with Benny resting nearby, she reflected on the day's events. The opportunities were immense, but so were the responsibilities. Every decision would ripple outward, affecting Benny, the town, and the broader community. Yet she felt a deep sense of confidence. The lessons of the past, the confrontations, the moral dilemmas, and the bonds she had nurtured had prepared her for this moment. She could navigate public attention, guide ethical research, and use Benny's abilities to benefit others without compromising her principles. Benny stirred, lifting his head to nuzzle her hand. Hannah smiled, feeling the quiet affirmation of their bond. He had chosen her as much as she had chosen him, and together they had the power to shape a future that honored both his gifts and their shared values. In the days that followed, Hannah began implementing structured programs with the foundation and researchers. Workshops for local children introduced basic principles of animal care, sustainable farming, and ethical responsibility. Townsfolk volunteered to assist, creating a collaborative network that strengthened the community and reinforced the lessons being taught. Benny continued to astonish visitors with his intelligence, solving problems, performing tasks, and demonstrating behaviors that revealed the depth of his unique abilities. Yet at every stage, Hannah remained vigilant, ensuring that his welfare was paramount. Luke's documentation of these initiatives captured not only Benny's extraordinary capabilities, but also the human values that guided their use. Interviews with townsfolk, children, and researchers emphasized the importance of integrity, community, and stewardship, turning what could have been a simple viral story into a meaningful narrative with lasting impact. As summer ripened into fall, Hannah felt a growing sense of purpose. The opportunities that had once seemed overwhelming now fit into a framework she had created, one that balanced attention, ethical responsibility, and personal values. She had discovered that fortune, when guided by integrity and compassion, could be a force for good, transforming not just her life, but the lives of those around her. Sitting on the porch one evening, watching Benny graze against the backdrop of golden hills and amber skies, Hannah realized that she had come full circle. The tiny donkey she had purchased for $1 had brought far more than wealth or attention. He had brought purpose, connection, and a path to legacy. And in that quiet moment, she understood that the future, while full of challenges, was also filled with promise. With Benny by her side and the support of friends like Emily and allies like Luke, she was ready to embrace it. The Appalachian Mountains stretched endlessly around her, a timeless witness to the life she had built and the choices she had made. And as the wind whispered through the trees, Hannah felt a profound sense of balance between ambition and ethics, solitude and community, fortune and responsibility. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, she felt truly equipped to navigate whatever came next, guided by integrity, love, and the unwavering bond she shared with a tiny, extraordinary donkey. The crisp mountain air carried the scent of pine, damp earth, and the faint sweetness of late autumn apples as Hannah Carter stepped onto the porch of her cabin. The morning sun stretched across the Appalachian ridges, bathing the valley in a warm golden glow. Benny, Her tiny but extraordinary donkey grazed quietly nearby, ears flicking at the soft sounds of the forest. The chaos of the past months, the unexpected fortune, the media attention, and the pressure of ethical responsibility had settled into a rhythm that was both purposeful and peaceful. Yet even in this calm, Hannah sensed that this was a pivotal moment, a chance to consolidate everything she had learned and ensure that her and Benny's journey left a lasting, positive mark on the community. Emily Brooks arrived shortly after, carrying a stack of planning documents and a satchel filled with educational materials. "Morning," she said, her voice bright with energy. "We've got schedules for the children's workshops, volunteers from the town, and the latest proposal from the university team for the sustainable farming program." Hannah nodded, taking the papers from her friend. "Perfect. Let's go through everything. Make sure all the initiatives respect Benny's well-being first, and then we can organize how to present it to the community." Luke Morgan, arriving with his camera equipment and notebooks, greeted them with a grin. "I've captured everything so far, from the early interactions with researchers to the workshops with the kids. The footage is compelling, Hannah. It's more than a story about a donkey. It's a story about values, community, and integrity. People are going to connect with it on a deep level." Hannah smiled faintly, her eyes flicking to Benny as he trotted closer. He nudged her hand, as if reminding her that amidst the plans, deadlines, and media attention, their bond remained at the heart of everything. She knelt, scratching behind his ears. "We've come a long way, haven't we, little one?" Benny brayed softly, a sound that seemed almost like affirmation. The morning unfolded in a series of careful, deliberate actions. Hannah, Emily, and Luke worked together to finalize the structure for the educational workshops. Children from the local town, ranging from curious 6-year-olds to teenagers interested in sustainable agriculture, would participate in hands-on learning sessions. They would observe Benny, engage in simple agricultural tasks, and learn the principles of ethical animal care and environmental responsibility. Volunteers from the community would assist, ensuring that the programs were safe, engaging, and inclusive.